Well, my parents met back in Macedonia when Mum was about 19 years of age. She grew up in a very authoritarian environment. My grandfather was raised in the time of the Ottoman Empire, and women in those days were chattel, so she had no control over who he was going to pick for her to marry. So she decided at 19 that she saw this person in the next village and he looked handsome, he was in his uniform, he was in his army uniform, and she thought, that's it, he's the one I want. So they basically ran away together. They took off at midnight on a horse, so she told me, and ended up in my dad's village, which was on the other side of Macedonia at the time. And she left her family and didn't return until 3 years later with a baby in tow. My grandfather was very reluctant to welcome her back into the family because she took off and ran off, and that wasn't appropriate in those days. You had to have your father's permission to marry. My own story, fast forward to the present day, and how I met my husband was through mutual family friends. Actually shared a house with a chap who had a friend that eventually came to stay with us, and she introduced Michael to me one evening when I came home from work, and we started to see each other, and then eventually we started to live together, and which was, from a cultural perspective, was really quite challenging because Macedonian girls don't live with anyone in a de facto type of relationship, certainly not in the 90s. If you brought someone home, that was the person that you had to marry. And I wasn't going to have anything. I wasn't going to play that game. It was quite difficult. So when Michael and I started to share our lives together, it was basically, I was quite isolated from my family, or at least I chose to be, because it was very difficult for him to be introduced to them. So I made the conscious decision that I wouldn't introduce Michael to the family until I was committed enough to say, look, this is the person I want to marry. I'm going to marry. And look, I was 33 years old at the time when I met him, so I wasn't 19 like my mum. So I was an adult and decided that that was what I wanted to do. And in spite of the difficulties, you push through all that eventually, because that's how strongly you feel. If you've fallen in love with someone, as my mum did, she was very strong about her journey with Dad, and made that commitment to run off, and she knew how difficult it was going to be for her, and I guess for me it was the same. It was difficult, but we pushed through that. For me, it's really interesting because as time moved on, we got a little bit closer to Dad in terms of we'd go and visit. And you find the things that you feel comfortable talking about. And my father was very good at growing vegetables, and he loved giving his vegetables away. And if you talked about vegetables and flowers, that was something that was easy for us to communicate about. So over the years, my husband has cultivated his own garden, and now if you look at what he grows, it's very similar to what Dad grew. And I think if Dad was around now, he'd look and go, oh, he's not a bad gardener. I would visit my parents on my own. That was what I had to do. And I was never asked, oh, how is your partner? He was almost a he didn't exist for me in many ways, in their eyes. Although my mother was very, she was happy that I was in a relationship, and she would come and visit. But if we had a Christmas celebration, Mum would come and visit with us. But there was always that other missing person, my father, and it was it was really hard because you just have this idea that your parents are going to accept this person, this wonderful person that you've met. Basically, he was tall, dark and handsome, he was smart, and, he was unlike any other person that I'd met in my, growing up, and, I fell in love with him. I fell in love with who he was and his family, and it was wonderful. And I wanted to share that with others, but it was not open to me, and I think that was very difficult. But I think I got through it because I had his support. Well, I was planning the wedding, and Mum was getting her dress organised, and I'd organised her, and I'd said, Mum, you're going to look gorgeous, on the day and everything. And we organised her dress and everything. She looked fantastic. And I said, look, at the last minute, I said, is Dad going to come to the wedding? I said, I've got, is he going to come? And she goes, oh, no, he's not coming because, Dad had a suit in the 1970s that was that pinstripe, and lovely chocolate brown and everything. And that was the only suit he had. And I thought, well, no, there's no way that you're coming to my wedding in that 1970s pinstripe suit, although it'd be very, probably very popular now. But back in it was 2001, that's right. And I thought, no, you can't, you've got to, wear something new. And I was prepared to pay for it, But he just said, no, I'm not buying another suit. I'm not coming to the wedding. I actually asked him many years later, and I said, look, I think it was Christmas. It was about 45 degrees in the shade. And I said, look, Dad, why don't you just come and have a drink with us at Christmas? And I said, I really want to know why it's so difficult for you to come to my home. I said, all you have to do is come and have a drink, it'd be really nice. It would make, and just come and have a look at our garden because, he was the gardener, he was keen and with gardening and everything. And, he just could not, it was such a difficult communicator. It was so hard for him. And he sort of virtually said under his breath, he said, mumbled something about, we only get married once. And I thought, that's interesting. What? We only get married once? Well, it was very interesting for me because one of my siblings was married 3 times, but he was a male, you see. So for men it was different. For boys it was different. For a girl, you had to be, the perfect daughter, virginal, and you did what your father wanted you to do. And so I guess I went against that. But that's where, I find that I've lived a little bit of my mother's life in that she made a decision to run at 19 away from an authoritarian father who was going to dictate who she married. So I made the choice my own. And and I'm happy about that. And I think in the end, I think Dad could, in spite of, not seeing Michael and my husband over many years easily, it was, I think he respected him for who he was, and that was good. And I'm happy with that. I feel that, how I've been raised, I am who I am now, and it's helped develop me as a person, and it is the sum of who I am. I think my Macedonian upbringing has helped me to empathise and connect with people in community that I can understand because I've been there, and I've been, my story is the same story as many others in a migrant sort of situation. You're growing up in a dual sort of situation. You're between a rock and a hard place sometimes. You want to be this, free-flowing Aussie girl, going to the beach and being a surfy chick, but you can't. You've got this other side, these restrictions. But overall, I don't think it's really, impeded my working career or my making friends or, living a good life.